The Policy Council concludes its focus on the World Economic Forum on Africa, held in Abuja from May 7 to 9, 2014, with a review of the panel discussion titled Africa Rising. The Africa Rising panel, which was moderated by Al Jazeera English journalist Adrian Finnegan, included Nigeria's Finance Minister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, former Barclays Bank CEO Bob Diamond, former Mnet Africa MD Biola Alabi, and founder CEO Mandela Institute for Development Studies Nkosana Moyo.
To people like Bob Diamond sitting right next to you, who may be concerned about security issues in Nigeria.
Well, thank you very much. Of course, security issues are very real and daunting for development, and we have to accept that. But I think as I talk to investors here, and after the very encouraging meeting we had with Premier Li Keqiang yesterday, it appears that people are looking at the continent for the long term. And that's a very interesting phenomenon, and they're seeing the potential. They're not looking just at the short term and the short-term risks, but the underlying strength of the continent for the future. And you know, many of them say, look, we are coming in to stay. And therefore, that's partly what is driving their decision-making as they look at some of the other strong fundamentals within the continent. Now, you have to hark that back to the present situation and say, of course, it's the challenges being faced now, as the Premier put it yesterday, and several other leaders, are seen as global. Yes, you know, local responses and the way they're handled matter, but these are now seen as challenges that the entire globe has to confront, because you don't know if it will be a bomb in Boston tomorrow, you know, one in Nairobi the next day, third one in London the fourth day. So that globalization of the price is also helping, you know, to sort of mitigate the perception. So those are I think the investors are looking at more fundamental issues than we might think.
All right. Well, now, Bob Diamond, you're obviously convinced that the time is right to invest in Africa. Why? You've taken the first steps to establish a banking venture here. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I think really to what the minister said, this isn't a investment because now is just the time. And when we think of what we're doing here, we think of ourselves as operators as much as we think of ourselves as investors. And we're here for the long run. We're building a bank. We're creating a bank through multiple acquisitions, through organic growth. And that's not an offshore investment. That's really being a part. And for me, this has been a long-term passion, Africa. It started out with my wife and our kids and our family creating a foundation here and doing work. Gifts of being with Barclays for 16 years was the very long history of Barclays had in Africa, which gave me, as one of the very few global bankers that really understood Africa and banking in Africa, because we had such a presence here, both the historic Barclays presence and through the acquisition of ABSA in 2005. And as the minister alluded to, I think a lot of us being here, and the room is full, is really a statement of long-term. It's a statement about brand. And one of the things that my partner Ashish Thakkar and I recognized in our fundraising last year, the vast majority of the funds that we raised, the equity we raised to invest, were from U.S. investors, which was very surprising to a lot of people. And the vast majority of those investors, it was their first investment in Africa. And I think that was, you know, in many ways very telling. And what we recognize when we're visiting investors, particularly in the U.S., is that there's a gap. The gap between the perception and being on the ground in Africa is wide. It's 5, 6, 7 years. And so, as the minister said, there are many countries challenged by security, not just Africa and certainly not just Nigeria. And so I think all of us being here is very, very important about the brand of Africa, the brand of Nigeria, and the reason that we're long-term investors, not short-term investors. We're building a business, and I think that's very, very different than just investing.
Bill, why has it taken the arrival of the World Economic Forum and the international media here in Abuja to highlight the plight of the almost 300 missing girls in northern Nigeria? Is the continent's media strong enough to challenge its political elite?
Thank you for having this panel. But I think there's a misconception that it took the world to come here for this to be a global issue or for this to be an important issue for us. For us here in Nigeria, this was on the forefront for us from the minute it happened. Bring Back Our Girls was a campaign that was started by young people in Nigeria through mobile technology. So they were using the internet, they were using mobile technology, they were on the news, and they were talking about action and how we can bring the girls back. So I think that it was the world economy, the World Economic Forum coming here for the world to get this attention, I think it escalated the attention and it sort of put it at the forefront of a global, but I think the biggest story that I tell people about Africa is we're not telling the story, and the only story that seems to be traveling is these type of stories. So communication and the media organizations globally and people like you have a responsibility of telling both sides of our story.
How relevant is a free press holding people to account to Africa's long-term development?
And I think that we are now in a world where we can't sort of hide from the truth. And there is the truth out there. There is transparency. And the journalists in Nigeria and Africa have to be given credit for actually going beneath just the surface and really digging and doing very good journalism. One of the things that we've been reading about across the continent is how citizens are actually also reporting cases. So we have amazing journalism houses that have been empowered lately, and we have enabling environments, which are the reasons why people like Bob are here, because there is more transparency, there is more reporting, and there is more. So I think our institutions are getting stronger and stronger. We still need to develop more skills. This is why there are things like the CNN Journalism Awards. There are people like you in the country empowering and developing our skills. So that on that end has to be done, but I think we also have to give credit and tell the story that journalism is very buoyant. And young people are reporting using every tool that they have.
Okay, I want to bring you into the discussion. You stepped down from Robert Mugabe's government over his running of that country. Are the current generation of African leaders hold full potential?
Okay, let me...
I thought this was about investment.
We'll get to that, I promise. There are a few little things we need to clear up first.
It is very interesting where you choose to start. When I was in London working in a private equity firm with my British friends, what I used to say to them is that Africans were taught to misgovern by the colonial masters. So you have to be careful where you start in terms of attribution. All of us, whether deliberately or inadvertently, learn and absorb from our environment. So the generation of leaders we're talking about, where did they learn how to lead, or their concept of what leadership is? They actually learned from the people who were running the continent then. And when you look carefully, even the speeches they give, Mugabe's speeches for a long time in his way of governance was as if he learned from Ian Smith. So there is really a causal issue, and optimism about the continent is that for exactly the same reason. Not because younger people are any smarter than the older ones, but the environment within which they grow up, which is influencing them, is fundamentally different.
I don't think there's any country on earth that goes to any other country with the interests of only that country in mind. They go for their self-interest. You know, they go for their self-interest. So you can't expect the Chinese to act like no one else. So every country interacting with another one goes for its self-interest. The issue for the country that is receiving is, are you articulating or are you clear your homework so that when they come for their self-interest, you make sure that your own self-interest is safeguarded? And that's the mistake we've always made on the continent, that we've not had the kind of preparedness, skills, and capacity to deal with the self-interest of others. So I don't think the Chinese are doing differently. So when they come here, and by the way, I think that Africa is mature now. We need investment from everywhere. And it's up to us to do our homework so that when we sit at the table, we'll be equal partners. Even when I was at the World Bank and interacted with them, I think it's too simplistic a narrative. That is being put. I think we need to be, it's much more sophisticated than that. They want a long-term relationship with Africa because they realize the potential of this continent. So they are not just looking at short term, let's grab the resources we can and run. And by the way, most of the things they invest in are also things you cannot take away. So they need to think about the modalities for engaging with the continent themselves, and I think they are doing that.
All right. The Chinese economy begins to slow. I mean, the West's growth endemic at best. Can Africa then draw upon its own resources?
Well, I think the answer is yes, but as the minister says, Africa needs to understand there is legitimacy in all nation states looking after their own interests. Absolute legitimacy. It's like sitting across a table and playing a game of chess. When we play a game of chess, you play to win. You don't play for me to win.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we need to figure out, we've got lots of resources, and that brings me to an interesting issue. Let's look at the issue of intra-Africa trade. If you take the years 5 years between 2008 and 2012 roughly, intra-Africa trade increased from 55 billion to 72 billion. A very impressive number, about 31%. But it's fascinating because when you start looking at relativity, because that's an absolute measure, you start looking at relativity in terms of global, as a percentage of global trade, intra-Africa trade did not move as a percentage. So Africans need to begin to ask themselves, why are we liking other people so much and not our neighbors? It's actually much easier in terms of trade to sell goods next door rather than literally buy unemployment or support employment from in other parts of the world, because when you look at the unit cost of labor, what we're doing is completely irrational. So Africa can do a lot of things by looking at the internal economy of the continent, much, much more than we're doing today.
Poverty reduction, lagging behind growth, inequality, undermining efforts to reduce poverty. What is the Nigerian government's take?
Yeah, no, I think those are two true things. And those are the key vulnerabilities of this Africa Rising. And, you know, I love the question that Ramesh, I think a young man, activist from Tanzania, I heard him asking on a program. He said, Africa is rising, but rising for whom? It is obvious that the growth that we have, the quality of the growth is not good enough. Because we are rising with inequality, and we are rising without creating enough jobs, and we are rising without a basic social protection system for our poor people. So, you know, we've grown at about 7% a year for the past decade, but it's also come with an increase in inequality, in our Gini coefficient. We've gone from zero. This is the measure of inequality that we've moved almost 10 percentage points. We're about 0.49 or 0.48 at the moment. And, you know, on the continent, you can see countries. South Africa is about 0.63. We're all growing, but we're not creating jobs. So the key question we have been asking ourselves in Nigeria is first looking at the evidence and accepting that, and then say, how do we change the quality of this growth? And what happened is that the recent rebasing we did of our economy showed us what the structure really is and the areas with the potential. So what we're driving is to try and create growth in agriculture, quality jobs, get young people. You know, the agriculture minister started a program called Agropreneurs to get 750,000 young people farming. We created a program called, Youth Enterprise with Innovation to try and get young entrepreneurs creating jobs. We have the entertainment industry, it has potential. So those are the things we're doing. And housing. Now, I want to say this, housing creates lots of jobs. It's not a tradable sector, so often it's overlooked. But in developed countries, housing is used to drive growth because it creates lots of jobs for plumbers, painters, carpenters.
My name is Femi Durojai. Welcome to the New Lagos, where things are improving every day. I work on the island and live on the mainland. But that's no longer a problem. With improved roads, I get to work faster. Sometimes I even leave my car and use the BRT bus, which is comfortable, fast, efficient, and reliable. After a hard day's work, the nights and evenings are even more fun. The streets are better lit, and the city is more secure. So I can catch my phone in peace. I pay my taxes because I want to continue enjoying the good things a big modern city like our Lagos brings. So it's my taxes that makes them real. Have you paid your tax?
Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
The Policy Council looked in on the Africa Investment Outlook panel, which reinforced the hope for a rising Africa.
Speaking of these phases of development, Mark, you talk about 3 waves that investors should be riding. What are they?
Well, again, let's just build on the integration point, because I think we haven't quite finished that one, because I think it's actually wrong to think of integration just in terms of country to country. I think there are lots of interesting dimensions to integration into cities. That is going to be a very interesting integration challenge. We can talk about integration also cross-industry, because as we talk about investment cycles, it's also going to be critical to think about, for example, how education works with infrastructure and how those work can play together. So I think that as we talk about integration, it's very important we don't think about it just in terms of country to country, and that's a key issue. So as one thinks about the investment cycles, a lot of it I think comes back to thinking not just what one's trying to do in terms of physical infrastructure, but I think it's also, and I'd like to argue, a lot about digital infrastructure. And I think too often we think about investment, what I would like to call the 3 investment myths, that it has to be big, it has to be foreign capital, and it also has to be physical. And I think actually there's a lot of small projects that work extremely well. There's a lot of what becomes very important is national and local capital as well as foreign capital. And I think we need to talk about digital infrastructure as well as physical, and then what the life cycles of those are.
Your thoughts, please.
Yes, let me start by saying that no country would come to invest in Africa unless they find good reasons to be in Africa. Right now, we have everything going for Africa, and including Nigeria particularly. We have the population, we have the resources, natural resources, and I believe that we need to set examples as a continent by first of all increasing the flow of business amongst the various countries within Africa. This is the reason why you have to lead by example. No matter how attractive your environment is, and we've seen in media reports even today, a lot of the things, good things going on in Nigeria today, or even in Africa today, particularly Nigeria, have been overshadowed by the hyped and exaggerated reports about the security situation in Nigeria. Even as we speak here today, a lot of the media attention on Nigeria today is about the insecurities and so on. But you are here in Nigeria today. You've seen how lovely and beautiful the environment is. So I'd like to say first and foremost that we have to sell our stories right and well. Sometimes I think those who do this negative reporting are in fact those who invest in Africa, make so much money in Africa, and probably want to discourage others from joining it. That's my belief. Now, yes, I think that's my belief. Now, going back to some of the things that I believe we need to do better, we have to move from shipping our natural resources in crude form. Part of the reasons why we are looking outside of Africa for investable funds, and it's not because you can do it yourself, but at least you can do a lot better. We export virtually everything without value addition. So we rely extensively on monoproducts. It can be gold in Ghana, it can be oil in Nigeria, but typically we don't add value, and so it limits how much we can generate from foreign currencies and foreign currencies to expand and deepen our own economies. And so we begin to look outside. Let's lead by example and reinvest funds and incomes we generate from our natural resources into activities that can provide jobs and inclusion for the less privileged in the society. I think we need to look at what do we use our resources to do. Where and in which areas do we reinvest the resources that we make from the natural resources that we have been endowed with? When we begin to do that and the external world sees that we are laying the foundation and going by example, then they will join because it's attractive for them to do so. There is nowhere in the world you would get the kind of returns you make in Africa today. But we've got to understand also that there is a relationship between risk and rewards. You are not going to get those kind of rewards without taking risks. So it's a question of how efficient you are in mitigating those risks and how aggressive you are. And believe me, smart institutions are already taking those advantages.
My name is Angela, and I'm Nigerian. I want to put it to Mr. Mohammed. You talked about privatization being one way to inclusion, but when we look at privatization, especially in Nigeria today, we see that it's the same rich people buying up the companies, and it's not really getting into the hands of the people, of the masses, so to speak. So I guess the question back to the panel is, how do you ensure that a process of privatization goes to the people so that you can broaden this market, like you alluded to, that we still have a very small market, especially looking at Nigeria and other African countries, if we take South Africa out?
I'll make you laugh, because when I went public, that's one thing I wanted to do. So I had 250,000 shareholders. But what I did, I really did minimum per person. Now, today I have 50,000 shareholders. And the reason was that all these small guys, the teachers who invested 10,000 with me, I think after about 3 months, 4 months, they sold it at 20,000. That's good. At least they made 10,000 more in 3 months' time. But that's going to be a global issue. Now, keep in mind that in America, 1.8% of the population, they own 55% of the wealth. So let's also be realistic. I mean, let's not talk too much about inequality. It's a fact of life. I mean, and if you talk about 200-year-old democracy in America, the most democratic country in the world, I'm glad they have two political parties out there, they'll be killing each other. They still have that issue. So it's an issue that we'll debate, we'll try to fight, we'll try to put solutions. Some will work, some will not work. But I really think that to answer your question in all honesty is that I think if there's a system of governments that looks after social services, and I like what you said about all the hard and soft infrastructure, we invest in education for that type of people. We have organizations that are responsible towards the society and uplift these people. And there is that new god Google, because they're going to go into a different world and do business in a crazy way, they'll make it somehow.
When we make the privatization in Côte d'Ivoire, there is a share of the capital given to the individuals of the country. Let's say you can decide that you go through the stock exchange and you give, let's say, 20% to the individual, local individuals. So that's one of the way to solve the problem. Thank you.
My intervention to Angela is the kind of entities that we are privatizing today need souls for them to work. It's not because we just want to privatize, we want them to work. The option that would satisfy you would have been to list them on the stock market, and you have thousands and thousands of people picking up those stocks, and not one person takes responsibility for making sure that they work. The model we have adopted of, getting people who have the deep pockets and those who can blend their own personal investment with attraction of debts from wherever to take control, but we must then ensure that we have a framework in place that forces them or encourages them to list after dealing with those issues. But having done that and having adopted that model, the question then that I think should be asked is, what then do we do with the proceeds of privatization? I think that is something that the government needs to put back into dealing with the issues that encourage or discourage financial inclusion or encourage exclusion. I don't want to use financial in this inclusion sense because it's not financial. You need to find something to bring these people back into the net of people who can sustain themselves. And what you need to do for each person is not too difficult. Just provide the resources and the environment for them to thrive. They are very brilliant. They are very entrepreneurial. We have the best set of entrepreneurial people, but they just can't express themselves because they don't have enough support. So if we can divert the process of privatization into dealing with those issues, it would have, in one way or the other, flowed back into the society.
Government wants our city to become a mega modern city. And so, government is providing modern markets for us to carry out our business. Now, this requires money. So we need to pay our taxes to help government to help us. I pay my taxes. I hope you've paid yours. I pay. Pay your tax. It's your civic responsibility. It's your duty. It's the law.
The World Economic Forum on Africa stressed the positive stories emerging from the continent in terms of investment, in terms of growth, and in terms of opportunities. But it also highlighted continuing risks and challenges. The consensus, however, was as investors in Africa are in the continent for the long term and are here to stay.